I would like to introduce the next session around partnership, rich partnership of future. And we have Jude McDonald from Whanganui Health Network and Whiturangi Walt Tapiata to talk about their experiences. And this fits within that collaborative governance space, iwi partnership. So we're very excited to listen in to this conversation. And so can I hand over to you, Jude and Whiturangi, to introduce yourselves?
E te ti, e te tā, e rau mai nei kei raro i te korowai o tēnei kaupapa, tēnei tā māua mihi, kia koutou katoa. Ko Aotearoa Walsh Tāpiata tōku ingoa, ko Aotearoa Mātai Wetu o Te Oranganui Trust, ko tētehi kaupapa hauora, tētehi kaupapa oranga ki te rohe whānui o Wanganui. Kia ora everyone, my name's Aotearoa Walsh Tāpiata. Really awesome to see a few familiar faces on the screen. And I am the CEO of Te Oranganui Trust, and we are a health and social service iwi governed organisation that responds to the wider region of Wanganui.
Kia ora tātou, Jude McDonald, CEO of Wanganui Regional Health Network, and I think the relevant factor here today is that I've spent my entire life serving my people in this rohi, and I think that the relationships that I've created with Whiturangi and others has been a foundation for what we're going to talk about today. So thank you for inviting us.
So kia ora, and you know, there are various ways in which you have effective communication, and ours is to actually just have a conversation with you. Because to be honest, COVID's been overtaking our lives. And when Jude first approached me about this, I said, yeah. And then here we are. So we have talked together about what might be some of the key tenets of our conversation today. And probably I'm going to start by saying, as you have heard, I govern a multi-iwi organisation, health and social service organisation. And quite often we're where the rubber hits the road in terms of conversations, in terms of kaupapa, and in terms of getting people to pivot about their thinking. And it's so good when you have an effective other who's prepared to go there with you. And that hasn't always been easy. It hasn't always been easy between the two of us. It hasn't always been easy in terms of the wider sector, but we had to have enough trust in each other to have those hard conversations, particularly if we are kaupapa focused about how do we best address the needs of our community. And I've seen very briefly some of the PowerPoints that you've had presented to you today, and I just said to Jude, oh, great words, but actually what does it look like in practice? And we're here to tell you the ups and downs of what it's like in practice.
Yeah. So part of it begins with a relationship, and I think the very first part of it is that you need to know who are those people that you need to have an authentic and trusting relationship with. And relationships don't build up overnight. It takes time, and a desire to be courageous leaders together. So some of our background is that we have been on some other intersectorial committees like the children's team, which was hugely contentious for our communities, eh? And so I was the chair, and you came in as one of the
newbies on the block.
Yeah. And so that's when we first sparked, and it was about, actually, this isn't okay. This isn't okay for our community. It's not okay for our tamariki. And so we led collectively a charge along with some other key leaders such as Nigel, who was from the police in particular, and we really decided to make a stand on behalf of our tamariki and oppose Oranga Tamariki's approach to how they were going to roll out children's teams and the outcomes that they wish to achieve. So I think that was the very first thing. It was that start.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say is that iwi weren't prepared to be the tick box at the table. We wanted to have a meaningful partnership, And so we laid that out to begin with. If you want us to be at the table, you need to have a meaningful partnership with us. By the way, iwi aren't always the easiest to get along with because we've got our own issues that we're having to contend with. Yeah. But it meant, therefore, that in any forum we went into, if I did not sense the partnership was genuine, then I just held it up. I just said, stop, tai hoa. You yourselves want a treaty relationship. You yourselves want equity. You yourselves tell us that tangata whenua need to be a key partner in this process. Well, then you need to hear our voice.
And so that was exciting. Well, it was. And I remember the very first day that we got you in on the Alliance Leadership Team meeting. And so, you know, as health leaders, we are really good at jargon and we're really good at saying the right things, but we don't really necessarily follow through on that. And I was watching the body language going on and thinking, oh, this isn't a great fit. And the fact that you were isolated, that you were a kind of a token iwi Māori added onto the list of clinical people. And that was difficult for both of us because neither of us felt like we fitted in that environment. And I have to say, our alliance for our region has never been as successful. And so when COVID came and we didn't have to go to the meetings, it was like, yay, because actually it wasn't authentic and actually they were never going to get anywhere because the relationship wasn't right.
And can I talk to you about being the lone voice at the table? So, you know, I've been around a few years. If a few of you can see the colour of my hair, you'll recognise that it's not black any longer or dark brown. And so that therefore meant that I had no difficulty in expressing my voice, even though I was the lone person at the table. However, in many of the forums that you're in, you might have a lone Māori at the table, and just depending on where they're at, whether they're new to the sector, whether they're new to the collaborative environment, you might actually find that they find it difficult to have voice. And so that's one of the challenges, is that don't invite them to the table and then don't create an environment where you listen genuinely to what it is that they're trying to say.
Yeah. So today, and the current environment with the health reforms and COVID, it's kind of our kind of world, really. So we have got a lot of examples of how we have pushed through and created something a little bit different. And I guess I go back to where I came from. I was raised in one of our rural communities in Taihape, and I have chosen to remain serving our people through the entire career that I've had as a clinician and a manager. And so the relationships that I already had were all those rural iwi who I went to school with, or they were my mates. And so I think you as individuals who are trying to now say, I need to reconnect in a different way, think about where you can have those relationships and where you can create the beginnings of something quite respectful. And I think of John McMenamin, who's one of our clinical directors, who has embarked on this quite vigorous journey of his on Te Reo and understanding all of that and where he's got to in the relationships that he's created.
Well, I want to go back to Jude first. So it is really interesting when you're in an iwi environment and we're talking about a kaupapa, and they say, well, who's going to represent us in this rural sector? And when they hear that Jude's on the board or on the group, they actually say, paitera. So when Māori are actually affirming a tauiwi person as having the skills, as having the experience, as having the background to actually represent them, I think that's pretty powerful. And that really speaks to what Jude has just talked about in terms of her commitment. So what I would be saying to all of you on the screen, and excuse me for being this blunt, is not all of you are going to be where she's at right now. And so that's a lifelong journey that you have to be on. But when and if you open yourself up to that criticism, to that need to pivot, to that lifelong journey about how to learn te reo, how to pronounce te reo, how to understand clearly the iwi dynamics of what happens in your community, then for us, that shows an openness. That shows, therefore, a willingness for us to be working with you. So when Jude talks about Dr. John, as we know, he's now embarking not only in te reo, and he's he's come to us and said, you know, I think I need a little bit more practice in that space. But he actually is also driving out some community research in the primary care space. And one, he's the only male on our group, but two, as a Pākehā male, he's really showing that he can listen to the way in which we might need to adjust research so that we're not just, once again, a tick box in terms of statistics for Māori in that research topic, in this research topic, and in that research topic. Most recently, we, can I talk about the HPV?
Yeah.
Okay, we are a part of a national piece of research looking at HPV, Whanganui, Wellington and Christchurch. And when we first met here in Whanganui, we said to Dr. John, sorry, bud, the way in which the lead researchers are saying this should happen ain't going to work in our community. And if you want buy-in from our community, you need to go back to them and be pushing them around some of these areas. And between him and Dr. Heather Gifford, they went back and we have got 100% buy-in, albeit it's going to be done in a very, very different way from those of us in Whanganui as opposed to how the research is going to roll out in Wellington and Christchurch. So another really good example of key relationships, preparedness to pivot, preparedness to push what our community looks like, even in a national context.
Yeah, it's a good example. So I do think we should talk about COVID.
Okay, let's talk about COVID.
That's where we're kind of at the moment. So there were some discussions at a DHB level about the community response, and there was enough of us around the rohi that already had existing relationships and said, well, actually, we need to step up as leaders and we need to lead and roll out our community response. So an outcome of that is that for each of our areas, and we've got the city, the Awa, South Taranaki, Whetering and I, she's the welfare lead, I'm the clinical lead, and then we have Ken Young, who's a GP in Bulls, who is South Rangitikei with Kat, who is Te Kautaku iwi lead over there. Again, in Taihape, that's replicated, and in Ruapehu, it's replicated. What that has created is a depth of learning about how we create and problem solve at quite a strategic level, I think.
Yeah.
And as I kept saying to everyone, look, we're not going to be pretty on day one, but we are going to be able to deliver for our communities. And I think we're starting to get to the point where our roles are much less vital now because we've set the tone, the strategic intent, the value-based partnership relationship, which is really important. We have good communication channels, and our whole prime focus was to keep people out of hospital. A real joy for us was most of last week there was no patients with COVID in our hospital, and in fact we've got quite picky now and saying, yeah, but are they COVID? Are they in there for COVID, or are they in there because for something else and they've tested COVID? But we have not had an impact of COVID in our hospitals, touch wood, at all. Yeah.
And I wanted to say that when these collaborations were established, we clearly articulated that there needs to be a partnership between iwi and a partnership between the community sector. So when Jude described the 4 geographies where we have hub leads, there is an iwi lead and a community lead, a clinical lead and a welfare lead. Now, this took a little bit of adjusting to for the wider community sector, because if any of you can remember back to March 2020 when we had our first lockdown, what tended to happen is that groups like the DHB, your local authority, your PHOs, they became the leads in that sector. And so 2 years on, we have a very, very different approach from our community, which is an iwi lead and a community lead. And what we have found is that people who come onto our forums are a bit nervous about having leaders like us, because they're used to being in charge. Civil defence, oh my God, but yeah, we've got it sorted. They're used to being in charge. They're used to, we need to see all the documents, and oh my God, the phases have changed so quickly that we've hardly been able to adjust to one, and then we're into another phase. But I think that through really, well, I was going to say through leadership, what we've now got in our forums is we've got trust. So, you know, and I'm going to use this as an example, and I'll tell him later. We've got our civil defence officer who, you know, came to the forum and was very nervous about whether we were addressing this and this and this and this. What we did 2 weeks ago is we said to him, can you please go and approach all of the supermarkets and get approval for us to get into the supermarkets to buy food, because they're not allowing us to purchase food in bulk for our welfare hub. He went off, he did that in 1 day, and our team now have a very strong interactive relationship with the supermarkets when we can't purchase in bulk from the likes of Gilmore's and others. So that's a really good example, I think, of how we've turned the thinking of some people that were very nervous about this lead relationship occurring. And as Jude has said, we're now in a space where we just facilitate the meetings. Oh, by the way, all of our meetings are facilitated by iwi. So that was another little factor, you know, it's not the CE from the DHB or the mayor from the local council, it's the iwi person that facilitates all of our hui. And it changes the total environment when you start with karakia, when you start with mihi, where the reo is freely spoken about in that forum, and where you always get feedback from an iwi perspective, and you always get feedback from a clinical perspective. And then the third is that you get feedback from a community perspective.
Yeah, and I guess what I've also noted is that it's brought in other cultures. So Pacifica have asked to be at the table. There's a lot of NGOs that have come to the table, and we've said, look, it's inclusive, not exclusive. But what I think we're seeing is quite a movement of the community feeling like they can all participate and add their dynamic or contribution to our COVID response in the community. And I guess that's the ideal.
Yeah.
But at the beginning, it was very hierarchical leadership. And I think our phones were running red hot with all of the regional commissioners and really important people around the district from MSD and all the others saying, oh, is this, are you going to be okay with this? Are you going to be able to manage this? And I think that last week, hearing from that MSD leader to say this is one of the best forums that she's part of, and she's part of many around the nation, was good for us to hear that our approach is creating an outcome that they hadn't seen before.
So I wanted to just, we're going to move on to localities next and then finish, but I just wanted to say, if you're seeing a romantic version of what's happening in Whanganui, get that out of your head. It is not romantic at all. We're tired, just like all of you. The tensions are ongoing, and we respect the tensions enough to ensure that the bigger picture might be okay, but the daily tensions still need to be addressed. And that comes right down to Jude and I. So you might think, wow, they've got an awesome partnership, but I tell you what, at times she tells me off, and at other times I tell her off. And I think that not only are we seeing that in terms of our relationship, but we're starting to see it in terms of relationships with critical leaders in our community. And with that in mind, are you okay if we move on to the localities?
Yeah, I think that's a good.
All right, so there we go. We decided that we would, we meaning more than Jude and I, would be the drivers of creating the locality plan for the Whanganui area. And when I say Whanganui, I'm not talking about the DHB area. We decided that we would create a locality based on iwi. And therefore, the boundaries that we have created are based on the iwi of this region. Because, for example, previously we had one of our iwi, just happens to be mine, that was split between the Wanganui DHB and the Taranaki DHB. So we created a locality plan, and because of all of the previous relationships, we were clear about one thing: iwi-led, community-driven. Iwi-led, community-driven. That's our mantra. Iwi-led, community-driven. Now, some people have said to us, but not everybody's at the table. And you know, quite often my response is, welcome to my world. You know, for the last however many years, we've been excluded from so much decision making, and everybody is welcome to come to the table, but they need to recognise that our mantra of iwi-led, community-driven is core to the way in which we are going to operate. So what we did was that we went on to all those transition unit hui and and we were a little bit mind-boggled, because there seemed to be a lot of people who were representing DHBs and PHOs and all of that kind of stuff, and we were there representing iwi or community, and we committed to trying to ensure that whoever sat at our table, there was iwi, there were providers, there were representatives of, in Jude's case, the PHO, which will be no longer in our new environment, and that the DHB would simply be the backroom support for us. And we thought we had it pretty sussed right from the beginning. But you know what? When you put a whole lot of people in the room around the table, we realised there was so much we needed to work through in order to ensure that it was a genuine relationship.
Yeah.
And we were arguing, debating, conversing right up until the last minute about our locality plan before we presented it in writing, and then of course had our oral presentation.
Yeah, and I guess for me, as one of the writers, in my head it was all very clear and it all made perfect sense. So of course Jude delves right into quite detailed explanations, and for a lot of the team it was like, no, this isn't relevant, this isn't who we are. And so having to have all those conversations and re-articulate it in a way that was meaningful for everybody. And there was a lot of detail that was taken out, which ironically when we were interviewed, they said, have you thought about this? And then we'd laugh and say, yeah, well, it was in yesterday, but it's not today. But actually there was a depth that we were really comfortable with, but we weren't ready to put it in, articulate it in writing. But I think the lesson for me was that this isn't my journey. This is a journey that we are embarking with our iwi partners together, and the direction of travel was really about what's important for iwi Māori partnership boards. So I think for me it was a lot of listening and a lot of thinking, well, what does that mean and what's important to you? And we had our whiteboards and we worked it through. And I remember there was one day where one of them said, we need the cancer services here. Now, as a clinician, I know that Wanganui is never going to be big enough to have a range of cancer services there. So I had to unpick it to help understand what would be tolerable, what would make a difference. And so I felt that it was an experience I hadn't had in my career before, and I'm really proud, and I'm really honoured that I was being invited as a Pākehā to the table to write our locality plan. And I suspect we're going to be part of the future as well, aren't we?
We would hope. We would hope, in whatever form, you know, because whatever happens in a locality plan space, this is our ongoing commitment to our community, and that is to have kaupapa in the centre, kaupapa at the forefront of whatever we're doing. And when I talk about kaupapa, that's talking about our communities. So yes, we're here next week if we're one of the chosen prototypes, but nonetheless, we've already got a whole lot of things in action, and this process has certainly helped. The other thing we know is this is the beginning of the road, not the end. because we're now going to have to go out and have ongoing conversations with our communities. And by the way, those aren't easy. So we hope that today you've kind of said, you know, at times we're kind of like this, we're exhausted. But there are times, and thank you for the opportunity to share our story with you, because really it's given us a reignition of energy that when we look at the big picture and what it is we're going through, we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. We can see Aotearoa. Aotearoa is a space of releasing that means that we hope we're on the right track, particularly on behalf of our communities. Nā reira, tēnei tā māua mihi kia koutou katoa, mauri ora. We're going to, I don't know if there's a few minutes, see if anybody wants to make a comment. Kei a koutou.
Nā mihi, that was inspirational, absolutely. And I hear you, iwi-led, community-driven is at the core. That is amazing, and all of the comments that are coming through are a testament to that. We do have 2 questions, so we'll go to those. Before I do that, I just want to say all of those ingredients of the preconditions of a collective impact approach that you guys are taking are all there. That history of collaboration, the urgency of the issue, and those influential champions. The bit that may be rocky is adequate resources and making sure that our governments and our funders actually put enough into this to make it work. So, but all of those preconditions, just gold. Thank you. So the first question I have is from Jackie Cooper. She says, it would be useful to hear the lead that you have found successful in your pandemic hub response. Let me just make sure I've got that correct. I wrote it down, where is it? Yeah, it'd be useful to hear the lead that you have found successful in your pandemic hub response.
Yeah, I think, I hope I'm answering the question, or we answer the question accurately. We started way back in about August, September of last year to meet as a collaboration. And initially we met monthly, and then as it came into the new year, things ramped up, and we've been meeting monthly ever since. So that's as a region. In addition, each of those geographies that you talked about also meet separately and weekly, and they all contribute into the space. One of the things I will say is the rural hubs were much, much more together than our urban hub. We had to create it, and that's because I think they've been meeting together for a lot longer over a range of issues.
I think that the respect that they had for each other, having grown up and worked together for many years, was really there. I think what was perhaps lacking was the permission to come together as a tight team and to be not permission for each other, but that the sector and the system gave them permission to be the leaders. And so often we see in small communities where the bigger party, whether it's the city or the main base, takes over and says, no, well, we know best. And I think every community, every rural community is doing it differently. And as we have had to, because I don't think we had worked in this way in the city before, because we've always had the DHB that has dictated through the ministry, I might add, as this is the way to go. So there's been a lot of hand clenching going on, because genuinely people with power think they should lead us through a process. And I guess we decided we would do it differently. Yeah.
Oh, ngā mihi. And one other question was, can you tell us how your PHO board governance supports your organisation to collaborate with Te Oranganui Trust? That's
okay, so our board is representative, always has been, of iwi, clinical and community. So I have an iwi leader, Kaumatua, on my board, who said to me a very, very long time ago, Jude, I want you to bring us all together. That is your job. So I had him in my ear saying, actually, for his view, no one can do it on their own. The richness is coming together. And so I always had that. Te Rongonui have always had their own general practice, and they've been a member of our PHO forever. And, well, not forever, actually. There was some video, I mean, we won't go there. But actually, so there was a provider relationship that formed, and Whetirangi was not a clinician. Well, you are a clinician, but you haven't come out of health. You come out of education. That's right. So we kind of started supporting each other more when her role, when she came into her role. But yeah, there's always been an existing relationship with Te Rongonui. They are our biggest iwi organisation in our region. So there's been some other contract overlap, but there's always been the general practice provider connect, if you like.
I think too that there might have been a degree of separation PHO iwi.
Yeah.
But actually, where the rubber hits the road, that's not so significant. But what is significant in the new health reform environment is that Jude, through her board, has made some quite critical decisions about what they're going to do moving into the future and what actually needs to now come out into the community.
Wow, that was, as I say, inspirational, and I think it warrants ongoing korero, and I think people will be reaching out, and I know in busy times, but just to capture that goal so that we can share the learnings of all that you've shared. So we're coming into a break now until